Well, it happened and it was amazing. Webinar World 2019 was our biggest and best yet. Wait, what? Some of you didn't make it? What were you thinking? Well, you're in luck because today I'm going to be sharing some of the best tips and ideas from this year's event. This is the On24 Webinar Best Practices series. Hello, friends, fellow webinards. I got this at Webinar World. Welcome to the On24 Webinar Best Practices series. My name is Mark Bornstein. I'm the VP of Content Marketing at On24, also Chief Webinar, they call me. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. How you doing today? How's work? You having a good day? You doing good things? Are you feeling good? I hope that you are. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite learnings from Webinar World 2019. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. The On24 webinar console that you're looking at right now can be completely customized. You can move any of the windows around. You can sort of make it your own, do whatever you want. We've set it in a way that I think makes sense, but you can play with it. We also have a bunch of buttons on the bottom of your screen. We call them widgets. I'm going to quickly review them from left to right. First, there's a media player to control your volume, then a slide button to open and close the slide window. Leave it open. Then a speaker bio if you want to connect with me. After that, there is a Q&A button. We're going to do Q&A at the end of today's presentation. I might even take some questions in the middle, depending on how we're doing on time. So as you're thinking of your questions, get them in. You got a question now? Get it in. We'll try to get to as many as we can. I really want this to be a lot of back and forth between us. After that, you'll see a Twitter widget. If you want to tweet about today's presentation, the hashtag is On24Webinar. That's pound On24 webinar. Next, you'll see a resources button. I always get asked, Mark, where can I get today's slides? They're in the resources button. We've also got some other complimentary content in there for you as well. After that, we always do this. You'll see a calendar button where you can register for next month's webinar, and it is an important one. We're going to be talking a little bit about it today. I'm going to be sharing keys to building an on-demand webinar program. People, the future is now. If you don't have a detailed plan to drive on-demand viewing, you are missing out on a ton of opportunities with your webinars. So you don't want to miss that one. I'm probably going to take some of the learnings from Webinar World and put it in that. So register now. Should we pause? You want to just click and make sure you get registered? Okay. All right, after that, there's a console icon. If you love what you're seeing now and you say, Mark, I want some of that, click there and you can get a live demo of the On24 platform. After that, you'll see a survey icon. I always talk about this. For those longtime listeners, you know I love to survey the audience. It's good. Don't be afraid to get feedback. I'd love to get feedback on today's webinar. Most importantly, we want to know what topics you want to hear in future webinars in this series. So we've got a plain text field. Please, at the end, fill out the survey. Tell us what you'd like to hear about, and we'll try to put together a webinar, maybe especially for you. Finally, let's see. On the far right, there's a help button. If you have any technical issues, you can press that button, get immediate service. And also, like as I mentioned before, I want this presentation to be as interactive as possible, not just me talking. Let's make this a real conversation. So as well as having Q&A at the end, I'm also going to push out some polls during the presentation, and we'll have lots of back and forth. Okay, let's get started. 10 essential lessons from Webinar World 2019. Oh my gosh, there's just so much to talk about, and we really covered a lot of ground. This year was such an amazing event. Before I start to talk about the event, let's do a little level setting and see how many of you were actually at the event or have attended a Webinar World in the past. So I'm just going to push out a poll right from the top. Have you ever attended Webinar World? Simple yes or no. You fill out the poll by clicking right there on the poll, not by going to the Q&A. And let's just see where we all are. Do we have some real webinars in the audience? So have you attended a Webinar World? Yes or no? I'll come back to your answer in a minute. Let's talk a little bit about this year. this year's event was definitely the best, I think, so far. We've been doing this for quite a few years now, 3 years now. This was the San Francisco event. This is our flagship event. It was just a fantastic 3 days of great sessions, but more than that, really great community. Really just, it was such an amazing conference. For those of you that were there, I think it felt different than other conferences. I go to a lot of conferences. I don't say that just because we put it on. I say that because, for one thing, it's very seldom that you get to go to a conference that's dedicated to a very specific topic, and where you've got people there that are on a very similar mission. So there was nothing but a whole bunch of webinars there trying to learn more about webinar best practices. And not only were there great sessions, but people were sharing their own stories and content. I thought that was really great. Here's Joe and I giving the keynote presentation. Let's see, here's just some shots that I took of some of the different sessions. We had a ton of breakout sessions from a ton of really big brands doing amazing things with webinars. We had different pods where you could come and learn more about specific areas about webinars and talk about your webinars. Just a great event. We had our Webinerd Awards. These were our Webinerd Award winners. Really excellent. So many people representing, I thought, so much of what was great about 2018 in the world of webinar marketing. All the Webinerds got this awesome jacket. Look at that jacket. I got one too. The Webinerd jacket. So cool. It's like a bomber jacket. Anyway, just a really great event. And like I said, the sense of community that we have been building together, this is not an On24 thing. This is a Webinerd thing. And the sense of the community that I feel and connection that I feel to all of you and that we feel to all of you, it's pretty amazing. And that you feel to each other. I really do feel like we're becoming a family. So it was just a great experience. But the most important thing is there were a lot of learnings, and we're going to talk about what we learned. So let's go to our poll result and see, first of all, how many of you actually have attended a Webinar World, so I'm sort of waxing on about it. I love it. So 84% of you have not, probably why you're here today, because the rest of you were like, hey, wait, I was there. I don't need to hear your best practices. 15% of you were. So this is good. So, me talking the event up is not intentional, but it is a good way of showing you that it really is a different kind of event. And for those of you that have considered in the past, have not gone, or will think about it next year, it really is an amazing experience. And it is just a conference dedicated to webinar marketing. And there's nothing but tons of best practices. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the top secrets that and things that I heard over the course of all the sessions. I attended many of them. The ones I didn't attend, I went back and listened to the tapes and went through every single presentation. And I picked 10 things that some of them are really high-level tips. Some of them are really specific tips. Some of them are generalizations, and some of them are really crazy things. But I wanted to capture for you what I thought were some really great lessons from some of the different presenters and some of the things that happened. The first one is more of a momentum thing. For those of you that follow me, you know I've been talking about this for the last few years, and we're seeing this change already taking place. But it was amazing how many companies in their presentations that were presenting at Webinar World shared their strategy for a funnel program. Basically, they're no longer, they're out of the business of doing webinars as one-offs, and now they're building really dedicated webinar programs that run through the entire buying cycle. And it was so impressive to see. I've been talking about this for quite a while now, and now it's really happening. It all started, there was a great presentation by Genesis, and they put up this Serious Decisions quote, which I thought was a great way to kick that conversation off. 70% of buyer's journey is really complete before a buyer even reaches out to sales. We, as marketers, are doing the selling. And that's a lot of responsibility that we as marketers have today. How are we doing the selling? Is it the white paper that's going to do the selling? Is it the little 2-minute video? No. It's the webinars where we're actually doing our job. It's how we, it's how we generate the leads. It's how we establish ourselves as thought leaders. It's how we position our products. It's how we demonstrate our products. And so many of these companies really laid out a blueprint for how they're building out these programs. So I wanted to share with you a few of I just plucked out slides from different presentations. I'm not showing entire presentations, but this is Genesis, and they showed a series that they had. It was called their migration series, and they didn't just build a webinar series for one buyer cycle stage, which what many companies are doing today. They had a series that literally went through the journey. So they had top of funnel webinars where they were sort of they were helping their audience identify a problem and realize in their minds, wait a minute, we need to do something. There's an action that we need to, there's a problem that we need to solve. Helping your audience realize a problem. Then instead of just staying thought leadership, then they moved to a mid-funnel webinar where it's sort of requirements building. What exactly do we need a solution to do to help us fix this problem? And they brought in experts to talk about that. And then they moved the series to a bottom of the funnel presentation. They call their supplier selection, but basically it was driving people to the conclusion that, which is the solution that is going to get the job done for us? And obviously, they were hoping that that solution was Genesis. So I thought that was a really clever way to do it. What a lot of companies do, frankly, what we even do here is we've got top of funnel webinars, we've got our mid funnel webinars, we've got our bottom funnel webinars, but we don't have series that actually run through the buying cycle. So I thought this was sort of genius on the part of Genesis. Very, very well done. So why don't we pause for another poll right now, and before I go any further with this topic, find out, well, what stages of the buying cycle do you deliver webinars for? I'm going to allow you to pick as many of these as you want. So is it top of funnel? That's what TOFU stands for, by the way. I know somebody's going to be asking, what is TOFU, MOFU, BOFU? Top of funnel, thought leadership webinars? Are you doing mid-funnel positioning consideration webinars? Are you doing bottom of funnel demo webinars? Customer training, customer upsell and cross-sell webinars, or just straight up training webinars? What stages of the buying cycle are you currently delivering webinars for? And then hopefully this guidance will help you figure out what the next step is. I'll come to your response here in a moment. You ready to know where to vote on the poll? Okay, good. All right, so we looked at Genesis, another really great presentation that had some conversation around creating a funnel strategy for webinars was Workfront, and I really loved how they laid this out. They had a section in their presentation called Integrated Webinar Strategy, and this chart, which is going to be very difficult for you to see, but I actually printed it out so I can read some of it to you because it was really interesting. They built a webinar funnel framework. And I want all of you to think about this slide. Think about what you're seeing and think about how you could build something like this too. So they basically took the funnel, the awareness, consideration, conversion, and loyalty, and they built a series of goals and objectives, and then basically figured out for each stage of the buying cycle what they wanted to do. So under the objectives section for top of funnel, they're just trying to generate new leads and build awareness. For the mid-funnel, they were trying to nurture mid-funnel, people through a pain point or through maybe exploring some ideas. Bottom of the funnel, now they want to build product preference, logical, and then enable customer adoption. All right, fine, right? Now we move down to the next section. Well, what is the content that they used for each stage? For the top of funnel, they were typically delivering webinars with industry trends. They had analyst presentations, lots of best practices content like we're doing here. And the presenters were typically executive presenters, key influencers, third-party partners, that sort of thing. When they moved down to their consideration webinar series, then they were creating a little more deep dives. They were doing lots of customer case studies, really showing the value, beginning to position themselves as the answer to some of these problems. The presenters now changed. So they were using internal SMEs. They were having lots of customers presenting, lots of partners presenting. A really great way at that sort of mid-funnel stage. I can't say enough about the customer presentation. That should be the most effective, one of the most effective webinars that you do, and you should encourage your customers to get on webinars and tell their stories. Then when we get to the conversion stage, they were basically just doing demos. They used webinars to give straight up demos. Their presenters were now sales engineers. In some cases, they were using salespeople. which is a great way to take what was once maybe a static demo and turning it into something much more dynamic, where the audience can not only watch the demo, they can ask questions, they can get involved, maybe they can download other companion content. Much better way of delivering a demo. And then for loyalty, they were building webinars for their existing customers to cross-train, to let them know about product releases and roadmaps and integrations. And the presenters were their CX team, their product marketing folks, that sort of thing. So you could see 4 different types of webinars they were building, completely different audiences, different stages of the buying cycle, different presenters, and different content. The format also changed. So for their top of funnel webinars, their thought leadership webinars, they're usually live, and they did about 2 to 3 per quarter. Does that seem like a lot? I don't think so. Most companies are doing monthly thought leadership webinars now. That's become sort of the norm. When they get to mid-funnel, they were doing a mix of simulive, which is where you pre-record it, but then run it as if it's live. But in some cases, it was straight to on-demand, right? And they were running about the same cadence. They would do 2 or 3 of those a quarter. Then, as we moved to bottom of funnel, they were doing those bi-weekly. A lot of companies are actually running these weekly. Some companies are actually running them every couple of days or even daily. Especially if they're on demand, they're pre-recorded. Just run them every single day if you want. And then the customer webinars were a combination of live, simulive, on demand, and they did them about bi-weekly. That's great. I'll skip the channels section, but I wanted to talk about the key metrics because it's important. I love how they laid this out, because this is something that people always ask me when they're building a strategy like this. Well, we've got a lot of people coming to the thought leadership webinars, but not that many people come as we move down funnel. That's the way it's supposed to be. So look, their expectations for their thought leadership awareness webinars were anywhere from 700 to 1,000 registrants, right? That's a big number. As they move down to consideration, only 200 to 500. As they move to the consideration phase, only 50 to 150. I know a lot of companies that only get 5 or 10 or 20 people in their demo webinars, and they don't care, because that's how you're going to convert people, especially without sales, to hold the hand of somebody. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. Is a great chart, and I hope that all of you are taking notes on this and thinking about how you can build a strategy that's similar to this, because I believe that companies like Genesis and Workfront are way ahead of the curve. So here's just a look at Workfront and some of the different, here's the awareness webinars, here are the consideration webinars. We've got a lot to go through, so I won't go through all of them quickly. Here's their customer webinar series. They put all their customer webinars in a hub so that people can access them very quickly. I thought that was really effective. And then one last slide I wanted to share on this section. Fitbit gave a great presentation as well. I plucked one slide from their presentation for this section. We'll go back to them later. And they talked about their cadence. They do the same thing. They've got lots of different types of webinars that they deliver in lots of different ways, and they shared their scheduling. So they do weekly sales demo webinars, where they've got a salesperson delivering a demo. Doesn't matter how many people come. That's the most effective way in which they can close business. They've got monthly third-party webinars, educational 30-minute lightning round sessions, which I'm going to show you some examples of that later. And they've got a quarterly thought leadership webinar. And then they also left room to do ad hoc webinars. If there's a brand new product release, if there is a big partner opportunity coming up, if there's any kind of news, if there's anything happening in the world, to leave yourself the ability to very quickly stand up a webinar and put it out from start to finish in a few days or in a week or 2. It's important to leave that flexibility. So anyway, my first lesson here is try to have a funnel strategy for all of your webinars. All right, let's go to our poll result and figure out what you guys were doing for your funnel strategy. So look at this. A fair amount of you are doing top of funnel thought leadership webinars. Only about 40% of you are doing mid-funnel webinars. 26% of you doing bottom of the funnel webinars. Only 43% doing customer webinars. There's an area of improvement. You want to upsell, cross-sell. You want to retain, reduce churn and get people to, get that stickiness to your customer base. Regular customer webinars are a great way to do that. 47% of you doing training webinars. So a lot of room to improve with that one. Okay, Our number two essential lesson from Webinar World is building a webinar series. Again, this is something I've been talking about a lot the last year or so. It was great to see other people talking about it as well. And so I just plucked a small part of the story. There was a great presentation from G3 Communications. Sherry Butt's one of my favorite people. They're awesome at G3. They do amazing webinars. And she had a great presentation, a breakout session on sort of a blueprint for building binge-worthy webinars. One of the things that she talked about is building webinar series. I am a huge proponent of this, and it was great to see other people start to talk about this as well. Why do a series? Well, she talked about the fact that as opposed to one-off webinars, if you have a regular recurring series, much like a TV show that you like to watch, it is a better way of engaging humans, as she said it, which is awesome. We're in the era of Netflix type consumption. That's the expectations that people have. It gives you the ability to have more consistent content. You can build a library of content that people can then binge on as they, see your programming. You can become a go-to source for your specific topic area. It's a great way to humanize your brand, especially if you have a presenter that you always have as a host of your series, much like we do with this series. It's a great way to develop your audience and to build a connection to your audience. And I just think I think this is where we're going. The future of webinars is going to be all about building programming. And Sherry did a great job of laying out different types of series. I thought this was very forward thinking. When I talk about series, I just think about something like this, but she had some interesting ideas. There's the mini series, and they do a lot of those, where it's an endless series. This particular series has been going on for forever. But the mini series is a series where you maybe only have 5 or 6 webinars. So, six webinars on perfecting the something, or, new rules for acquiring customer and retaining customers, and it's a 10 webinar series or a 5 webinar series. And that can be a great way of generating excitement and getting people into more content. There's the episodic series, and Sherry was actually nice enough. She used our show as her example. She also used the example of LinkedIn's Live with Marketers series, which they do a really great job of a regular cadence series. So we've been doing this webinar for many, many years. We've got a nice loyal following of people that will come, and it's a great way to continue to build new audiences. But it is a great way to connect with an audience. It is a great way to establish yourself as a thought leader in a specific area. I think a lot of companies are moving to this, and in every single industry, in every niche within every single industry, there is a need to be the voice. There is a need to be the thought leader, the trusted advisor. These are the types of webinars that will gain you that status. So think about your industry and think about how you can create a series to sort of be that company. She also talked about taking virtual event series. So a lot of you participate in conferences, run conferences, or hold events outside. Maybe you're doing a seminar series or whatever. You can stream those, or you can film those and turn them into a series of webinars based on what happened in those events. That can be also really effective as well. So a lot of different ways to create a webinar series. And I think this is where we're going to see webinars going in the future. The big key to a really successful series is decide on a theme. Make sure that the theme will help you inform the type of format that you want to have. Should it be formal? Should it be conversational? Do you want to have a panel? Do you want a single presenter? And is it brand centric? Is it product centric? Is it challenge centric? What is it? And help you define what your series should be, and that'll help you figure out how to create a series that will resonate with your audience. Okay. Our number 3 things essential lessons I learned at Webinar World was, and this was one of my favorites. This was probably one of the coolest things I saw, and that was webinars to create content. Not webinars to deliver content, webinars to create content. I think this is really forward thinking. This came from a presentation by the Merrill Corporation. Axel Kerstetter and Abby Roberts gave this presentation. They talked about how Merrill leverages webinars for content creation and distribution. Axel, I've known him for a little bit, and great guy. And really, I think they're ahead of the curve in terms of some of the cool things that you can do with webinars. And one of the things they talked about in their presentation is We're giving webinars. We've got a large audience. Why don't we leverage the power of that audience to get data that we can then repurpose and repackage and work to our advantage? And so he talked about this concept of just-in-time content. When you really need content fast, when you need data fast, a lot of us are spending money on survey companies to try to get data. We all know how expensive surveys are and how difficult it is to get people to fill out surveys. How do you get that type of data? Well, they figured out if you use live polling, if you've got a regular, if you get big webinar audiences, either in a single webinar or aggregated over multiple webinars, you have the ability to actually pull a fair amount of data. So what they did is they created webinars with big name panelists where they would drive a fair amount of interest, and they would work with their PR agency to figure out what are some topics we want to be able to report on, create polls around those topics, and through those polls, the polling data, they were getting huge numbers to be able to then create all kinds of extra content from the webinar. Now, it's the way in which Axel talked about this really working effectively is figure out the approach first. Don't just give a webinar and look at your polls and see if there's anything interesting in there. What they do is they say, well, okay, we want to create a couple pieces of content. We want an infographic and a press release. Maybe a story or two that we can write. Maybe it becomes a white paper later. What piece of content, what do we want these pieces of content to look like? And what questions, what type of data do we need to get us there? And that's what they did. They figured that out, and then they delivered those webinars, and with those webinars delivered a long series of polls to collect data. Brilliant. So now, instead of a survey that you put into the field where you get maybe 40 registrants or 40 survey fills, or maybe you get 100 or two. Now they can literally hundreds and hundreds. I've talked to now companies that will get thousands of poll responses in some of their webinars where they have a lot of people. So what they do is they run the webinar. When the webinar is over, they take the data from the poll and they create press releases based on the polling data. In some cases, they activate a bonus Q&A to get more data. They create infographics based on that polling data. And then after that, they can begin to spin off other pieces of content. Let me show you what it looks like on their website. Check this out. So this, they don't know that I did this, but I went to their website and I pulled this. And this was, I think, from their press release page or their press page. And here are 3 press releases based on webinar polling data. Brilliant. Brilliant. Here, let me zoom in on one. And this is a press release. And you can see what it says. According, M&A outlook downgrades to neutral according to Merrill Corporation survey. Where was that survey? It was in a webinar. What a brilliant way to get data. This is something that you can do too. If your audiences aren't huge, just repeat the same poll in multiple webinars. Just don't change the poll at all. And eventually you'll aggregate a fair amount of data, but a great way for you to leverage your webinar to get more data. All right. Our number 4 learning from Webinar World 2019. This one I'm cheating a little bit. I'm taking from a coworker. But we did see a lot of different presenters allude to it as well. And that is the concept of using a webinar brief for managing multiple webinars. The idea here is that, you know how we talked earlier about most companies now, or it used to be that we only did 1 webinar a month, excuse me, maybe a few webinars. Well, now companies are delivering, that's never happened before. By the way, when something like that happens on a webinar, don't freak out, it's okay. Anyway, we're managing a lot of different webinars. How do we do that? It's going to get harder and harder to manage multiple webinars with multiple speakers with lots of different content. And what a lot of companies are doing is they're now formalizing that process and making it more process-oriented. And so I was a part of a presentation, although really a minor part of a presentation that was given we had a customer masterclass session at the beginning of Webinar World. And my coworker, Aman, was talking about how she manages webinar series behind the scenes. And Aman managed this webinar series and many others for On24. And one of the things that she put together to help make that work because we man it. At On24, we've got a lot of different roles and responsibilities. It's not one person running a webinar. I'm delivering content, I'm creating content, but Aman was behind the scenes doing promotion and console building and all this, the sales interlock and webinar management. We're delivering like 20, 25 webinars a month. I know, right? That's crazy. That's a lot of webinars. And it just became too much. And so what Aman put together was what we called a webinar brief. And she talked about how having a brief, and let me zoom in on this a little bit, is a great way to keep people on the same page. So this was a editable doc that everybody that was involved in the webinar could get to, and it would have everything. So the name of the webinar, the audience goals, the funnel goals, the abstract would be put on there, creative guidance for the creative teams that were going to be building creative assets for it. All the emails that were written, the promotional emails would go in that document. Anything that had to do with that webinar existed and lived in the webinar brief. I thought we were one of the only companies doing it, but we talked to, and one of the things I saw at Webinar World was a lot of other companies were doing this as well. There was a great presentation with Salesforce, and they run a ton of webinars, and they work off of a similar type process as well. So as well as having that really organized structure for your funnel stages to your webinar programs, when you get to the individual webinar, build out a brief. Have all the information that's relevant to you. You can, customize it in the way that you need. Have it as an editable doc, maybe make it a Google Doc, and then everybody that's involved, whether it's the creative team, the presenters, whether it is the promotion folks, everybody that needs to get any data from that webinar, any information about that webinar, can get it from that brief. Make sense? Yeah? That's a good one, right? Okay. All right, we're rounding the horn here. Our number 5 key lesson from Webinar World 2019 is having an on-demand webinar strategy. I'm sort of foreshadowing next month's webinar where I'm going to do a deep dive into this, but I do think this is an important one. And everybody was talking about it. So even in the breakout sessions where they were talking about other things, everybody managed to find a way to talk about on-demand strategies. And some of the slides I saw in some of these breakout presentations blew my mind in terms of some of the on-demand viewing numbers. I pulled out a couple just for you to see. And so the premise of this idea is, you all know this, we're in the age of the digital buyer. These people are on their own time. They're taking in content, not when we wanted to have them see it, but when they want to see it. And look at some of these stats. This was from a Morningstar breakout session. They did a great session. Look at this. So here's for one webinar, they had 600 registrants, 365 attendees, 186 of those watched live, almost 200 of them watched on demand. That is crazy. More people watched on demand than watched live. Here's one from Workfront. We talked about them earlier. They had a webinar, 895 registrants, 400 watched live, about just over 50% watched on demand. This is from Align. Now we're totally different industry. This is the dental appliance technology industry. And look at, so these are aggregated numbers. In 2017, they delivered 16 events with over 3,500 attendees. 55% of those viewed on demand. In 2018, they ran 23 events with 5,600 attendees and 63% viewed on demand. Like, this is so compelling. I'm going to put these slides in next month's webinar, by the way, right? I got to do that. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. I mean, if you need any more evidence that this is important, that's it. So one of the great presentations was from S&P Global, and they did a wonderful presentation, Laura Lopez Dominguez. She talked about how to maximize an on-demand strategy. And basically her message was, have links to on-demand content everywhere. Everywhere your people go in the webinar lifecycle, make sure that they know that there's going to be an on-demand version available, and just promote like crazy. So she showed examples of making sure people know from the registration page that there'll be an on-demand version available. In the housekeeping of a webinar, before a webinar starts, let them know there'll be an on-demand version available. Maybe give them a link. In the resources widget, make sure, maybe that's a great place you can put a link to additional on-demand content. Maybe you can have a link in your widget tray to on-demand content as well. Tell them again when you're sending out your follow-up email, whether they attended or didn't attend, make sure that you're sending that on-demand link out. And maybe not just a link to that webinar, maybe a link to all of your on-demand content. And then she went crazy and she started talking about all the different places in which they put links. Here's just one example. They have links to their on-demand webinar programs in their email signatures, right? That's pretty great. You could probably do it as an image banner. It might look better. But the point being, there's just nowhere you can't put it. And then finally, she showed they have an on-demand webinar hub. I'm going to talk a lot about this next month, and I can't say enough about this. This is the future. This is where we're going. That Netflix style, that Netflix look and feel. And so they built a really effective webinar hub where people can go in and binge on lots of different content. You could subscribe to different types of programming, and you get full analytics on everything everybody does. And I thought that was really effective. Genesis, I talked about them earlier. They also talked about this a bit in their presentation, and they really built an actionable plan, and they really treat on-demand content as its own channel. So they build a subscription-like service for on-demand content with on-demand hashtags, targeting specific and unique audiences. They create on-demand landing pages for some webinars. They make it searchable. They make it SEO ready. And they incorporate other channels to promote it. So they use paid social, they use own social, blogs, and so forth to link people back to the on-demand content. It's like I'm practically giving next month's webinar. A lot you can do with on-demand. Fitbit talked about this as well. What they do is they will also take their live webinars and repurpose them and then rerun them as live events, which I thought was pretty great too. So many ways you can leverage the power of your on-demand content. Now, our number 6 lesson that we learned from Webinar World 2019 was to mix up the webinar lengths. I get asked about this a lot, and the only thing that bothers me about this concept is marketers are always telling me, they're not asking me, they're telling me, Mark, everybody's got short attention spans. Our webinars all need to be like 5 minutes now, right? Like no more than maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes, but that's it. It's not true. So let me just start with this. According to our recent benchmark survey, and by the way, you can download our benchmarks report in the resources widget right now, but we see the average viewing time for a 1-hour webinar not going down, it is going up. So it's now at about 58 minutes. People are watching for the full hour. Why? It's because it's becoming more engaging, it's more interactive, it's more fun. Webinars are better. That said, you should have a mix of different lengths and types of webinars. Remember the funnel stages webinar that we saw where the different types of webinars had different lengths. I think this is a good way to do it. Fitbit in their presentation talked about a strategy for some of their webinar being shorter form content. They do long form content as well. But one of the things I thought I'd show you is they do these really cool webinars they call lightning sessions. They're 30 minutes. They have a content to interactivity ratio of 2 to 1. So you'll get about, you'll get about, 20 minutes of content and about 10 minutes of interaction. They keep it really light. And let me show you some examples of what they look like. And it's just these really super fast, super interactive, short form webinars. Just a great example of how you can do this. Different times for different needs. As we talked about before, there's a lot of different ways to slice this and dice this, but what a lot of companies do is their thought leadership webinars tend to be the longer form webinars. So maybe you've got an hour-long series like this. Maybe you have some 30-minute webinars. That's okay, nothing wrong with that. Your mid-funnel webinars, maybe you're doing a bunch of case study webinars. They can be 30 minutes or 20 minutes. That's absolutely great. In many cases, they're on-demand content only. Then you may be giving some demo webinars where you're just demonstrating products and services, and those may only be 15 to 20 minutes. Mix it up. It's not one or the other. It's important to have a mix of lengths. And it was great to see, I could show you examples of this forever, but it was great to see in all the presentations, people were showing off the different types of webinars they were giving. I saw a little bit of everything. We saw examples of 10-minute webinars. We saw lots of 20 and 30-minute webinars, and of course, a ton of 1-hour webinars as well. Not much over that, but I did see some longer webinars that were broken into section and created as like virtual days, and those are pretty cool too. All right, our number 7 lesson from Webinar World 2019 was using video across the webinar lifecycle. And so I like to talk about video a lot. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of video. I think video humanizes your webinars. It's just better in every way. A lot of us are getting to that point where we're starting to integrate video, and there's so many ways to integrate video into our webinars. I was going to ask you like how you do it, but there's so many. Let me just do this. Let me ask you a poll. Do you currently use videos in any form in your webinars? Let's see where you feel. Be honest. Nobody can see your answers. So never, too risky. No, but you hope to, or yeah, you're currently utilizing video. That could be video presenters, video clips, whatever it is. But let's just see where we all stand with the video. By the way, do you like doing the polls? The polls are fun, right? You're a part of this. You're a part of this conversation. I feel like every time we push out a poll, it just pulls me out of presentation mode a little bit more and reminds me that you're right there. And I think this is a way in which we keep our webinars more human and more connected. So I'll get to your responses here in just a moment. But we had a great presentation. There was a breakout presentation from Jackson Systems. And Tyler really talked about how they use video so creatively. They didn't talk about just having video in the presentation. They use video literally everywhere. As soon as somebody interacts with your webinar, from the first invitation to after the webinar is over, there's some element of video integrated. And I thought it was so cool, and I wanted to show you a few of their slides. When you begin to get their promotions, they integrate videos into the promotions. A lot of us do teasers. I'm a big proponent of having video teasers. It's a great way to get people to at least click on a reg page. They, for their training webinars or for their training schedules, they'll put video on there as well. Then on their confirmation, so if you register, then when you go to a confirmation page, when you get a confirmation page, there's another video that basically says, here's what you're gonna learn. Sounds like a lot of work, but it's a great way to get a higher level of registration to attendance conversion. I think that's really important. Then, what they do is they like to do a pre-roll video before your webinar goes live. So for those of you that came to this webinar before we started, you may have noticed that there was video rolling. We do this too. We have a 15-minute pre-show, and they did the same thing. It all started with somebody telling them that basically puppy videos are going to increase their viewership and get people more interested and connected to their webinar. So they just started including puppy videos leading up to their webinars. Genius. If you can walk away with one lesson today from this webinar right now, it is get some puppies in the pre-roll of your webinar or somewhere in your webinar. But what they did is they would roll a puppy video, and then eventually they were like, wait a minute, we're losing opportunities here. So they started to have some other things. They would have an agenda slide come up. They would do speaker bios come up. They would have some advertisements for upcoming events. They would have some news, maybe a little welcome video from the presenter that is about to present. They'll have a little housekeeping slide. But they always had the funny videos, and they usually a dog video, and people would intentionally come early just to see those funny videos. What a great way to get people to attend your events. Genius. Once their webinar started, then yes, of course, they had on-camera presenters. Some of these were training webinars, some of those were not, but they got people on camera. They used video, I think, really effectively to get people to connect on air. But then when their webinar was over, on their on-demand archive page, they had video telling people what was available to them on demand as well. Just everywhere you went, video. I love this idea, and it's clearly sounded like a little more work. It doesn't have to be expensive video. You can film videos literally using this. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. You can just look into your laptop and record yourself. Really effective way, though, to get people more connected to your events. And Genesis talked about this a little bit as well. And I was going to run this video, but I don't think we're going to have time because I got a couple other videos I'm going to run. But They repackage when their webinars are over and re-promote them, and they basically just had their presenters get on the air and talk about, hey, I delivered this really awesome webinar. Here's some of the cool things that happened. You should watch it on demand. And that is a great way in which Genesis continues to drive people after a live webinar using video to get people to the webinar. I do this a lot myself. We're always experimenting with it, and so we will often have 2 or 3 different types of videos to get people interested to register and then get them to attend. So try to play with it. By the way, that video right there that you're looking at, I filmed that with my laptop in my house at 11 o'clock at night. You can see it's dark outside. Anyway, all right, so let's go to our poll result and see where you guys are with video. And not surprisingly, so 62% of you in total are not doing video. A very honest 11% of you are like, no way too risky. 51% of you are hoping to do video. Only 36% of you are doing video. Webinars are coming a long way. You can trust. There's so many ways that you can reliably deliver video. If you can't, maybe if you're delivering webinars on a meeting tool or something like that, be careful. But basically, just try to find ways that you can successfully integrate video. It will make all the difference in the world. All right, a couple more. We're going to get to your questions, and I'm really excited about this one. So one of the things that I heard everybody talking about, this was a theme at Webinar World, and it was a theme driven, I think, more by the webinars and attendee than as much as by the presenters. This idea of changing the tenor and the tone of your webinars, and how do we make them more approachable? How do we make them human? And the importance of doing that. And there were a few moments that I really thought captured the essence of that. One of them was we had a panel discussion on the main stage, hosted by our CMO, Joe Hyland there. And he had one of my favorite people in the whole world, Joel Harrison from B2B Marketing in London. And then he had Sheree Keith, also there from Serious Decisions. She's awesome. And they just had a conversation about great marketing. But one of the things they ended up talking about is why the tone of marketing needs to change and why the tone of webinars need to change. And I pulled a little video clip from the conversation. Let's roll that clip.
But yeah, I think when brands are authentic, people don't want to feel like they've got a bunch of BS coming at them. I think brands that do that well produce great content. I'd love both of your reactions on those.
And authentic, but also informal and engaging. And we're talking about this before. Not being corporate, not being cold, having a level of intimacy and relatability. Which and I think that's one of the most exciting things that's happened in B2B in the last five or maybe a bit longer years. Is that B2B brands have shed this perceived need to be cold and corporate and reliable and responsible, all those things, and have actually started to behave like a human being.
Yeah, crazy, right?
What a stupid idea.
Well, it's in humanizing the brand that's what we can learn from B2C.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing that we might have lost, but we're moving back in that direction.
So I think Joel really captured the heart of it, relatability. If you're delivering a lot of webinars and you're just thinking about delivering content and you're not thinking about your relatability, you're not thinking about your audience experience, you're missing the opportunity. We talked earlier about becoming a trusted advisor. That doesn't happen unless you find ways to deliver your content in a more human way. It doesn't matter what type of content you deliver, and it doesn't matter what type of company you are. You can be a healthcare company dealing with really important and serious issues. I've seen webinars on major diseases of the world and all kinds of different very serious subjects. But that didn't mean that they weren't human. They were incredibly human, and that's what made them good. I've seen financial services presentations that were of a serious nature, but they were delivered with a more informal tone. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. The other person that really captured this well was David Nyhill. He was one of our keynote speakers. This guy's amazing. If you haven't seen him speak, go to YouTube. You'll find him. He's got a book out called You Talk Funny. It's great. And he talked about a number of things. He gave I tried to pull some of the tips. This is not his slide. This is me watching his presentation and just kind of capturing some of the things he talked about. Leverage the frustrations and pain points of your prospects and try to re-spin them in a way that lightens them up a little bit. this idea of being funny, he said, be fun before funny. I think it's very hard to force funny. If you're scripting funny, chances are you're going to lose. It's very hard to be funny. Even comics have a hard time with that. Maybe that's not true. But if you're just fun, funny will happen. And I thought that was a great piece of advice. Self-deprecation is an easy entree into humor. Just make fun of yourself. Everybody loves it. I do that all the time. I'm literally choking on stage. What was that earlier? I don't know. Anyway, analogies and metaphors to make human connections. I've talked about this a lot in the past. In your slides as well, with the imagery that you used in your slides is a great way to connect to people. Take the mundane and make it relevant, I think is a really good tip. And then he talked about this idea of how do you make a really impactful point? And he talked about the idea of delaying impact words or messages. We had an 80% growth rate year over year, blah, 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 blah. Or because we did blah, 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 we had an 80% growth rate. Stop. And that's a much better way to make a point. He had some really interesting things to talk about, and then he talked about this rule of three. Let me roll a clip from him. He talks funny, by the way, so let me just warn you right now. He's got an Irish accent. You're going to understand. Let's roll that clip.
Delaying the impact words is huge in yours on the metric side of life. So if you're trying to stress a metric and you're trying to sell something about your product, take that key metric and move it to the end. That's what, in the world of public speaking, that's what makes timing look amazing. But in the world where your audience is online or you're trying to communicate something in a meeting or pitch in any way, that's what grabs people's attention and lets them know this is important. So imagine you had a growth rate of 80% year on year. And I say that to you. We have a growth rate of 80% year on year. It's very easy to keep running into the next part of that. Imagine somebody at TechCrunch Disrupt talking about their company. We're like, we had an 80% growth rate year on year, and then we raised a Series B, and we hired Josh did our marketing, then we pivoted and we rebranded, and then whatever. Off they go. You get lost very quickly. But if I take out the important word and consciously put it at the end of the sentence, that becomes the reaction point, and that becomes the point where your audience take note. So if I say very consciously, year on year, we had a growth rate of 80%. And stop talking, they take note of 80%. So because I put it at the end of the sentence, because I emphasize it a little bit, and because it's the end of the sentence, it creates a natural pause, that becomes the takeaway note. You'll write it down. So you can control when people take notes, and you can control what they remember from engaging with your content. Very important when you have no audience present. So take out the keyword and move it to the end. In the word of all things funny, engagement, and entertaining, take out the funny word and stick it to the end.
What a cool piece of advice. I love that. And for those of you trying to make points in your webinars, that's a good way to do it. He talked about the rule of three. Three is the smallest number that the brain recognizes as a pattern. So if you have three things and you want to make a point or you want to be funny, change the pattern at the end. He showed an example where he talked about his book, and in the back of the book jacket, he's got two, serious write-ups, and then the last one was his mother talking about what a great book he was and what an idiot he was. Anyway, it was really funny, but that idea of making a point. So I really like, if you want to learn a little bit more, you can check out his book. He's really interesting, or go YouTube him. But I thought the idea of making a point is a really effective way to do it. Okay, last two things. We're going to get to your questions really quickly. Consistent creative through the entire webinar journey. Morningstar showed some really great examples of everywhere you went in their webinar experience, the webinar looked exactly the same. The creative was the same. We had a presentation from Sketchdeck, who does our creative, and they showed how in all of our marketing, whether it's a webinar, of course, all of our marketing, there's connectivity, there's stickiness with a similar look and feel. That holds true for your promotions as well, and we saw lots of examples of people talking about how they create a real consistent level of communication in their promotions, and I thought that was a really great lesson. The final thing, and I think this was the spirit of Webinar World 2019, is try new things. Try new things. There were so many crazy ideas. I could not capture them all for you. Just a few things, random things I heard at Webinar World 2019. Drop same-day promotions after the webinar has started. What? I want to try that one. Promo emails with no copy, just a banner. Create short featurette webinars to highlight a new feature. Make it like 5 minutes. I like that idea. Shooting videos on iPhones and integrating them into webinars. I've done that. That was actually a really good one. Gamification on confirmation emails. Don't wait for them to get in the email, in the webinar. Do a little gamification right from the beginning. And then when you're in the webinar, you can announce the winners. I thought that was really clever. Give away Starbucks gift cards to encourage audience participation. Sure. There were so many things. The important thing is be bold. Don't be afraid. Whether it's using video or trying new things, great webinars are there for the courageous your audience will be forgiving. They will be forgiving, and they'll appreciate you trying to do things to make their experience better. So with that, let's get to some of your questions. And there are a lot of them. Sorry about that sound, guy. The first one comes from Lisa, who says, in improv, they say try to be interesting or unexpected instead of trying to be funny. I thought that was a great tip too. Yes, I completely agree. Don't try to be funny. Being funny is just weird. If scripting funny almost never works. I've done it occasionally, but it rarely works. Let's see. Ryan says, we're a decent-sized B2B company. We've been doing webinars for about 8 months. We struggle with getting attendees. We promote through all the channels. What can we do to improve? Make it more personalized. Try plain text emails. Try changing the tone and tenor of those emails. Try integrating video into those promotions, but try to make it more personal. Shorten the emails. Do something differently. Play with the delivery times and the days. That could also make a difference. We'll have a webinar on driving registration in a few months. That's coming. I promise that'll be an important one. Let's see. Christine writes, what are your thoughts or recommendations around pre-recorded webinars not live? Love them. And you saw there was a ton of examples where people were literally just recording straight to on-demand content. I think that is where we are going. And I'm not saying live webinars go away, but there will be a mix. And in many cases, you'll do more pre-recorded webinars than live. For those of you that have compliance issues, that makes it really easy. Let's see here. Rebecca says or asks, how important is mixing up the lengths of your webinar? Oh, you must have missed that. Our series is a Take 20 style. Yeah, so you heard me talk about that earlier. I love it. Mix it up. Don't just commit to one time period, though. I don't, if you just do all 20-minute webinars, don't be afraid. Have longer ones, have shorter ones. It's okay. Let's see. This is Kristen. She says, with webinar series, would you be looking at shortening the length of webinars and look at providing more focused content in shorter bursts? Well, that was a very popular one. Yeah, so we're just talking about that. Sure, feel free to do it, but again, don't be afraid of the long form webinar. Mark, strongly recommend customer-led webinars. How can you vet a customer to make sure that they are a good speaker before you commit to doing a webinar with them? It is tough. In some cases, your potential speakers will have content out there. You can go to YouTube or you can go to their own webinars and see if they're presenters. If they're not, interview them, talk to them on the phone. And if you think that they're borderline, here's the thing. Don't let them present. Just get them involved in a conversation. Interview them. Have a panel discussion. That'll make it easier. Get them out of presentation mode. That's the most important thing. And by the way, that is a rule that you can use for all of your presenters as well. Let's see. Let's go to a lightning round here. So I'll see if I can get as many. At Webinar World, there's a lot of discussion about continuing the journey for the viewer. What are some best ways to do this? Have CTAs integrated into your webinar. Give them the next place to go. In this webinar, if you want to click to a demo, the On24 platform, you can do that. If you want to sign up for next month's Thought Leadership webinar, you can do that. There's a lot of different content integrated into the resources widget. Have CTAs everywhere. Mix them up by funnel stage. That is a good way to do that. That's Anna Marie asked that question. And all right, couple more. We'll squeeze a few more out here. Let's see. Jonah says, how can we successfully blend fun with professionalism, given we're kind of a suit and tie company? Changing the format, for one thing. Get out of presentation mode. Just have people talking to people. Even if they're in suits and ties, that can be interesting. There's a lot of financial services companies that have people talking about interesting things. As long as you have interesting people talking about interesting things to audiences that are interested in those things, you're going to be okay. Just break out of presentation mode. I think that's the best way that you can handle that one, Jonah. Maggie asks, how much lead time do you give people to attend do you need to give people to attend a webinar? It doesn't make a difference. Increasingly, people are promoting webinars up to like 6 weeks in advance. I'm not sure if that's the spirit of your question. I hope so. We've got a lot of Christines. This is like the third one. How far in advance of a webinar should you promote? Oh, same type of question. What are you guys talking to each other in advance? What's going on here? Again, anywhere from 3 to 6 or 8 weeks is what we're seeing. Don't be afraid to promote a little bit longer. The longer the runway, the better. Kelly asks, what is the best way to handle polls for Simulive webinars? It's just difficult. It's very hard to do. You can push out a poll. The problem is if you pre-record the webinar, then you don't have a way to going to polls. And so, but if you run it live and then run it again later Simulive, then the poll will work more effectively. All right, I'm going to do one more, even though they're always telling me to end, because that's the guy I kind of am. All right, last question is going to go to Scott. Thoughts on ideal minimum time between announcing and broadcasting a webinar? Everybody's asking the same questions. Again, give yourself a lengthy runway. I think that's a good way to do it. Okay, so lots of tips and best practices. I hope that you guys got a lot out of this. There's just so much. Listen, for those of you that didn't attend Webinar World, really, you'll want to be there next year. We're going to have Webinar World events in London and Singapore and Sydney coming up this year. There's going to be another one, hopefully lots of them next year as well. But it's important to remember to just stay open. Stay open to trying new things. And if you do, you'll have successful webinars. I want to finish today's webinar as I like to finish all webinars by saying, look, I know how important your time is. I want to thank you for spending some time with us today from the On24 studios in San Francisco. This is Mark Bornstein. We'll see you next time.